Good evening. Welcome to Taking Stock here on ENCA. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Three great guests for you this evening as we look at the future of the economy. We've seen forecasts that South Africa is on a hiding to nothing, that the economy will be in failed state status by 2030 unless we get our ducks in a row. Is it too late or do we still have time? Up first this evening, Adrian Enthoven, who is the Deputy Chair of the Solidarity Fund, will speak to Bongiwe Kunene at the Banking Association and to Cas Coovadia tonight, Chief Executive of Business Unity South Africa. Up first this evening on Taking Stock, Adrian Enthoven, who's Deputy Chair of the Solidarity Fund. Now, the Solidarity Fund was seeded basically by government with 150 million rand contribution. The President committed some of his salary. There have been numerous donations, including from Mary Oppenheimer and that family of R1 billion, thus perhaps with 500 million rand. Very significant funds. And I think, Adrian Enthoven, to date, you've got just over 3 billion rand that has been collected in a relatively short period of time.
I mean, there's been just incredible support, Bruce, from, we've had over 2,300 local companies, foundations donating to the fund. We've had over 300,000 individual donations from South Africans from all over the country, the Northwest and the Free State being the largest contributors. So incredible support, big global multinational companies, foundations, foreign governments, there's been just an incredible support, and also not just financial support, but in-kind support. From Transnet, who donated trains in rural KZN and Eastern Cape to do testing. We've had fuel donated. We've had companies supporting the fund with pro bono services, probably over 15 companies providing pro bono services to the fund, and over 80 people working full-time pro bono for the fund. I'm happy to say that in our 6 months, we have not spent a single cent on consultants or salaries or board fees. All of the expenses have been pro bono, and that means all the money we've received have gone to direct impact investments.
How have you managed to keep a firm control on it? I mean, this is a vast amount of money, and as we've seen through so much of what has happened in the last couple of months in terms of PPE procurement, there have been various cases of very high-level fraud, for example, and very disappointing cases of fraud. How have you managed to keep a lid on it?
So, Bruce, I mean, we've made sure right from the beginning that we've operated with the highest governance standards. We have a very strong independent board, subcommittees that are well-resourced. The board meets, has a standing, and the subcommittees meet every week, or at least every 2 weeks. They have standing meetings every week. So there's incredibly strong oversight and governance. And, the people who are involved, we've got very senior level people from the private sector who are involved in the fund, with deep experience. The companies that are supporting the fund, have extensive experience, and we've made sure that we've operated with the various highest governance standards. And I think it's been a bit of a problem that we are seen to be caught up in some of what we've seen in the news. But the fund is an entirely independent organization. We work very closely with business and with government, but we operate as an independent entity with the highest governance standards.
Has anybody managed to misappropriate any money from the Solidarity Fund?
No, there's been no misappropriation of funds. I mean, we're extremely happy with everything that we've seen so far in terms of both the where the funds have been directed, in terms of the areas of where we think there's the highest impact and the greatest leverage for our money, and how those funds have been spent. I mean, in some instances, it's slowed us down a bit. We would like, in some instances, to have moved faster than we have. But I think we've taken the responsibility of spending the funds of the country extremely seriously, and have made sure that that every step of the way there's proper diligence, there's proper process, and that the funds are well spent.
I mean, it just shows what is possible when there is proper observance of standards and of governance. I mean, it is possible to do this stuff cleanly.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have committed projects with committed pipeline of close to 2.3 billion rand in 6 months. And just to give you an idea, I mean, Bruce, in that time, we had to set up a whole organization, an institution with teams, with board, subcommittees, charters, delegations of authority. I mean, this has been an immense effort. But we've spent almost 2 billion rand in our health response, over 300 million rand in our humanitarian response, and close to 50 million rand in our solidarity campaign. So there's been very significant commitments and disbursements that have been made over the 6 months into areas where we think, it has had a very significant impact in this crisis.
There's probably, 800 million rand, which remains available within the fund, depending whether or not there are any further donations that come through. What happens to that money? Because we are seeing, thank goodness, a tapering, at least for now, in terms of infections, in terms of deaths. There's a dramatic slowdown in the number of deaths and hospital admissions. The need for the fund, at least in the short term, seems to be abating quite a lot.
Yeah, Bruce. So I think it's important to understand that, the mandate of the fund was, it was very much set up as a crisis intervention and to help support, in particular, the health system and augment the health response of the country, to unite the country in the fight against COVID-19. So I think it's very important that we appreciate that, the response to COVID is not just, the problem is not going to be solved by government alone. It requires all citizens, communities, organizations, businesses to all be part of this national effort. And the fund was really set up to unite the country in the fight against COVID-19. And even though the kind of health crisis has begun to abate, that's meant that we've, less focus now on critical kind of interventions to support the health system. But there are still really important, there's really important work that still needs to be done, particularly in the humanitarian area. We know that, part of our mandate is to support those that have been affected by COVID-19. And we know that, there are very extensive kind of humanitarian crises in gender-based violence, in poverty, in food insecurity and hunger. And we also know that, a big part of the work of the campaign has been our communication campaign and behavior change campaign. Because as the economy opens up, it's really important that we maintain the disciplines around mask wearing, physical distancing, good hygiene, so that we keep these infections under control. This is going to be important. This virus is not going away. Even once the vaccine arrives, the virus is not going to disappear. And so the role that the fund has got to continue playing in making sure that we communicate and help to mobilize the country around these behaviors so that we don't have to go into more severe lockdowns again. It's very important for our economy and for the society and the health of the nation.
What about the 80 people who have given of their time, yourself included? I mean, the Enthoven interest in South Africa's economy is significant, whether it be in Hollard or whether it be at Nando's. Gloria Serobe, the chair of the fund, has got multiple directorships of companies. Have you been able to maintain a day job while doing all of this work too?
It's been difficult, Bruce. I mean, I think you can't kind of appreciate just the amount of work. I mean, not me, but the people involved in this fund. It's just been the most incredible effort. People working over weekends, 12, 14-hour days. The effort to do, to get the stuff done has just been immense. And to see the contribution and the commitment of South Africans through this effort. And, as I say, it's not just people working in the fund. It's the companies that are working for us, the people that are committing their time and their services to us. And then we look beyond the fund at what people are doing in communities, how communities have responded to deal with, kind of hunger and food relief in their communities and other humanitarian issues. I mean, I think, in a way, like South Africa is at its best when the country and its citizens are all pulling together behind, a single national effort. And I think we've really seen that through this crisis. We've really seen citizens and people and communities and businesses, organizations, all kind of pulling together. But, the fund is a great example of that. I mean, it's a great example of, a kind of national calling to say, people need to step forward and be there in the time that the country needs them to play the role that they can play. And it's been wonderful to see so many people stepping up.
And it's precisely that same sort of can-do attitude that's going to be required as we rebuild the economy. Adrian Enthoven, thank you very much, Deputy Chair of the Solidarity Fund. We'll find out what the banking industry is up to as we prepare the ground for a recovery, coming up on Taking Stock. Well, the banking sector is absolutely core to the stability of the economy and the ability of the economy to recover. The growth numbers that we saw last week were horrendous. And if South Africa is going to have half a chance of digging itself out of the deep pit of despair, economic despair that it is in, the banking sector is going to need to come to the party. The banking sector, though, is battered and bruised after a horrendous first half of 2020. We have seen dramatic increases in bad debts in the banks and expectations by the banks for bad debts into the future, simply because so many people have lost their incomes and their livelihoods, and it's very hard for them to keep paying back their debts. Bongiwe Kunene is the managing director of the Banking Association. And Bongiwe, we look at the recent sets of results that have come out from the banking industry, and universally expectations are that this economy is going to be in trouble for some time.
Yeah, Bruce, what we are seeing is being confirmed by the statistics which has just come out. So in a context of an economy that in Q2 contracted more than 50%, it would be naive to think that the banks would have good results. So far we've had 3 results, and all of them have had numbers for provisioning which are sharply high, which implies that the banks are doing all that they can in terms of the regulations we have to future-proof their business.
Sorry, Bongiwe, but in future-proofing their business, lots of people, and generally it's people who are denied loans by the banks, say banks never lend. Then banks do lend, and then people don't pay them back, and then you get bad debts. The appetite for banks to lend in this economy, which is going to contract by probably about 10% for the full year, which is 5 times worse than it was in 2009, when the economy fell by nearly 2% that year. It's a very, very significant decline. The banks, however, are open for business, right?
Yes, yes. So maybe a few things to put on the table. The first one, if you look at the May figures in terms of how well provisioned the banks are and how stable the South African banking system is, up to May 31st of this year, we had really good, robust numbers from the banking sector. So we don't have a concern yet about the financial soundness of our banking system and the financial sector in South Africa.
And the reason that's important, Bongiwe, just to make it absolutely clear to everyone who doesn't understand why it is, because people generally aren't fans of their bank, and they think that banks are fee gouging rascals who are simply out to make a buck for themselves. But for a stable financial system, you need a stable banking sector. And for that banking sector to be stable, you need a stable economic system, right? Yeah.
So in terms of us as an industry, we probably are among the most highly regulated industries in the country, because we are part of the international financial architecture. So the rules that we are regulated by, most of them don't just apply to South African banks, they apply to banks that are in the system and the organization called the G20.
There will be lots of appeals from small businesses, from individuals, to say that banks need to be more lenient than they have been. Yes, lots of payment holidays have been made available to people, and we've seen those extended from 3 to 6 months in many cases, as households really have come under a huge amount of pressure. How much capacity is there within the banking system to provide a bigger cushion than has already been provided to South Africans and to businesses?
We are still providing that support to businesses, households, and individuals that are applying to the banks. So what happened was, in March, we agreed to have a 90-day program, which was payments deferral. When that came to an end, on a case-by-case basis, businesses have been going to the banks and applying for more leniency. And given the circumstance of that business that is applying, leniency is granted. Now, what we have to keep in mind is that the banks are very committed to keep the economy going. Also, when it comes to their clients, they are also very much committed to maintain the relationship with their clients. And maintaining the relationship does imply that when the support is asked for, under conditions, terms and conditions will apply, but that support will be granted.
Give me a sense of why it was when the president announced his 500 billion rand relief package. It was 300 billion rands worth of relief and 200 billion rands worth of additional support, if you like, that was going to come from the banking sector. But in the beginning, it was quite cumbersome. It was really hard to sign up for. People lost a bit of hope in it. And it didn't take off to nearly the extent that one might have expected in this environment that it would. Is it recovering? Is there greater interest, or is it something that just hasn't taken the hearts and minds of South African businesses?
So multiple facts. The banks, because of their willingness to work with their clients, by the time the government-backed scheme kicked into play, the banks had been giving this assistance for 7 weeks. So there's an announcement of the scheme, and the way in which it was negotiated, there were firstly just principles what it must be used for. And among those principles were 3 core ones: that you give these loans for businesses that are using the cash they will get for operational expenditures only. And they must pay their employees, so the salaries and wage bill goes on, and part of the payments must be for the landlords and for the utilities. So that was a very narrow set of principles to work on.
You know, here's the thing, Bongiwe. I mean, a lot of people have been disappointed with it simply because there were so many T's and C's that actually it became self-defeating. Is there any leeway? Is there any opportunity to make this more accessible so that we can get small businesses not only surviving, but thriving and hiring once again, because this economy is desperate?
Okay, so when we revised the scheme towards the end of July, we didn't see great improvement in the first 2 weeks of August, but by the end of August, we had disbursed 570 million, which for the 2 weeks between 15th August and 29th August, which indicates that the more it is relaxed and the more we communicate, more companies can see that they do actually qualify.
Okay, so there is money available. There is money available, absolutely, provided some requirements are met. Those requirements are not as stringent as they first were. And the idea of this 200 billion rand government-backed scheme, which has been provided by the banks, is to get this economy going. And I guess you won't know if you qualify unless you apply. And again, it's an appeal, I suspect, from the banking industry to make use of facilities that are available.
Honestly, we can only ask the entrepreneurs and business owners, come and apply.
But Bongiwe, we need to leave it there. And I thank you very much for your time this evening here on Taking Stock. Bongiwe Kunene, who is the Managing Director of the Banking Association. In a moment, big business wants this economy opened up more aggressively than has been done so far. The opportunities that come with that, with, of course, the risks that we've seen increased cases around the world as economies have opened up more quickly. More in a moment. And finally, this evening on Taking Stock, Cas Coovadia, Chief Executive of Business Unity South Africa. Business community has been calling for some time for an opening up of the economy. Are we ready, Cas, for what is coming?
Bruce, thanks for having me. I think we are ready. I think that we have seen a decline in both infections and deaths. Certainly experts we've been speaking to tell us that this seems to be the trend and will be the trend for the foreseeable future. So I think that we are ready for what's coming, provided we are not irresponsible about it. I think that let's keep our masks on, let's try to social distance. Let's understand that this thing has not just disappeared, but it is on a downward trend. And I think that it gives us the opportunity to now open up the economy, which is something we really need to do.
There will be some people who say, hold on a second, this is just big business being greedy and simply wanting to profit off vulnerable South Africans. But what we are seeing considerable evidence of is the huge negative impact, of course, that this has had on the economy. Just in the last 2 weeks, the GDP numbers have come out. We've seen the destruction of sectors. And if we don't get back to work, the long-term consequences of this COVID-19 will make the disease itself look like a walk in the park.
No, absolutely. And let's not forget that we started pre-COVID in recession. So we weren't in a great place. In the early days of COVID, we were downgraded to sub-investment grade. So it wasn't a good place to be to start with. COVID has exacerbated that. And I think that the quicker we can start opening up, the less difficult it is to actually get back and start ramping some sectors up. And so it's not just big business wanting to make profits. I think that probably people who have borne the brunt of this are workers, are people in dire straits, people in low income and some middle income sectors. So it's not just for big business. I think that as a country, I think we would all understand that we need to get the economy going so that people can start getting back to work.
The president has acknowledged that the state is running out of money. The tax collections are going to be such a disaster this year because there've been no profits. With people being cast out of work, there's less money going to come from PAYE, which is the most important and biggest part of tax collection. VAT collections are going to be way down because we're not buying fancy stuff and having fun anymore. And I mean, unless we get this economy moving, government hasn't got money in 2021 to pay state grants and old age pensions and the important stuff that it's there to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the president is right. And I think that what the government now needs to concentrate on is to do whatever is necessary to enable business to ramp up as quickly as possible. I think so some of the things we've been calling on for years, get the spectrum going, get the RFP for the next tranche of renewables going, bring some significant infrastructure projects to market so that the financial sector can fund those things. Some of those levers do lie with government. And if we can pull those levers quickly, I think the potential of business investing significant sums of money into the economy and kickstarting the economy is undoubtedly there.
That's the important thing, because business wants the assurance from government that it is safe to invest. And it's only going to be safe to invest if the policy framework is in place. It's the world's longest running and most tedious conversation, simply because it's been the conversation for the last decade and is simply wrapped up in its intensity. Is there a recognition by government? You spend time at NEDLAC, you speak to government and to Labour and to other members of the business community that we have run out of time?
Well, we certainly, at every interaction we're having with government and other social partners, pushing that we are in crisis, we actually probably have run out of time. I think the way I've been framing it is that I think we've jumped the cliff, and the choice we have now is either we open the parachute for a soft landing or we have a hard landing.
The president is talking the talk. The president is saying we will do infrastructure, we will do public-private partnerships. He's saying all of the right things, but the words need to be translated into action.
And it's stuff that can be done very quickly. So, I mean, again, they've delayed the spectrum. Can't understand why. If it's a capacity issue, then private sector is saying, tell us what capacity you need. We prepared to provide the capacity, use the capacity, structure it any way you like. Transparency, accountability, and so on, but use the capacity. There's absolutely no reason why the next tranche of RFPs can't be, renewables can't be actually, the RFPs can't be issued. There's absolutely no reason why we can't actually make it easier for businesses to operate, to open businesses and so on. So there's some low-hanging fruit that does lie in the ambit of government. And I think that we just need to now take those decisions and do it. And we could do that within the next month, to be quite honest.
Cas Coovadia, Chief Executive of Business Unity South Africa. Thank you for joining us on Taking Stock. Well, thank you so much for joining us and watching Taking Stock this evening. Thanks also to Cas Coovadia, Business Unity South Africa, to Bongiwe Kunene at the Banking Association, and Adrian Enthoven, who is the Deputy Chair of the Solidarity Fund. Thank you for your time tonight, for watching us here on Taking Stock. Join you again next time. Until then, bye-bye.